Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee on August 12th, 2019. My name is Philippe Cunningham, council member for the 4th Ward and chair of this committee. With me at the dais are council members Cano, Schrader, and Vice Chair Cam Gordon. Please let the record reflect that we have a quorum and can conduct the business of this committee. Colleagues, we have a public hearing, 5 items for consent, and a discussion item. If there are no objections, I will go ahead and go through and discharge the consent, move up the discussion item, and then save the public hearing for last. We have been joined by Council Vice President Jenkins. So I'll start off with the consent item, accepting a grant from Hennepin County for a 5-year period for teenage pregnancy prevention services for the Health Department school-based clinics. Item number 3 is authorizing a contract with Bridge Healthcare Partners for school-based clinic billing services. Item number 4 is setting a public hearing for neighborhood and community engagement NCEC commission appointments. Item number 5 is accepting a grant from Hennepin County for a 5-year period to help provide mental health services at the health department school-based clinics for 5 years. So I move approval of those 4 items. Are there any questions or comments on the consent agenda items? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Next up, we will be moving to to receiving and filing a report from the Minneapolis Health Department related to biochar and its use to sequester carbon and improve soil quality in the city of Minneapolis. We have our awesome team here who's going to be kicking us off and doing the work. So welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Cunningham, members of the committee. My name is Jim Doughton. I'm the Supervisor of Environmental Services for the Health Department in Minneapolis. One of the things that recently the council passed was a regenerative agriculture and biochar resolution supporting its use throughout the city in order to combat climate change. One of the things that we're looking at is just what is biochar and where can we use it across there. In order to answer those questions, I have Linnea Champ off to my side here. Linnea got an undergraduate degree in biological chemistry from Grinnell College in Grinnell, Iowa, and is currently pursuing a master in public health at Harvard based on sustainability, health, and the global environment. She's interested in innovative ideas that make urban environments healthier and more sustainable places. And as part of that, she's been looking at exploring how biochar can be used across the city enterprise. And so I'd like the opportunity to introduce Linnea and to give her a chance to explain what she found out.
Good afternoon, Chair Cunningham and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity for me to be here today. Minneapolis has gone a long way with biochar since experimenting it at a small scale in 2014 with the Little Earth community, to in May having council members Schrader, Jim Doughton, and Robin Hutchinson visit Stockholm's biochar plant, to passing a regenerative agriculture biochar resolution in June of 2019. Building on this momentum, I've spent this summer outlining the full potential of biochar in Minneapolis and looking how the enterprise can maximize its use in the fight against the climate crisis and deliver the greatest benefits to Minneapolis residents and our environment. Biochar is an excellent tool to add to the city's green infrastructure toolbox, all of which makes Minneapolis a healthier, cleaner, and more climate resilient city. Biochar is a carbon-rich charcoal that is made when agricultural waste such as tree clippings, grass clippings are heated to very high temperatures. When biochar is then added to soil, it can increase agricultural yields, it promotes microbial and fungal growth, and it absorbs carbon. Improving soil health increases soil fertility, plant nutrition, improves water quality, and increases drought resistance. The city of Minneapolis and the world as a whole may be on the tipping point of reducing carbon dioxide, and carbon sequestration, or taking carbon out of the atmosphere, is critical to our ability to mitigate climate change. I created this graphic to outline the discussion and the potential uses of biochar. The potential uses that I think Minneapolis could benefit the most from are urban agriculture, carbon sequestration, urban forestry, stormwater management, and soil remediation. First, as I mentioned, in 2014, Minneapolis entered a memorandum of understanding with the Metawakan Sioux community to use biochar in urban agriculture. We found that here in Minneapolis, crop yields were up 20 to 30% when biochar was applied to the soil. Moving on to carbon sequestration, in the past decade, there's been exponential support for biochar to sequester carbon. For its use as a carbon negative technology. The International Panel on Climate Change has approved biochar as a carbon negative technology. It can actually take carbon out of the carbon cycle and put it into the soil on an order of decades to centuries. Soil contains 3 times more carbon than the atmosphere. Therefore, increasing the soil capacity of our soil will help decrease carbon dioxide. As Minneapolis works to decrease emissions by 80% in 2050, a carbon negative technology may be essential to making this happen. The first thing I did this summer was look at land cover throughout the city of Minneapolis. So I looked at the land that wasn't occupied by sidewalks, buildings, or other structures that biochar could be applied to. And the exciting news is that there's a lot of land here. So using biochar, we have the capacity to sequester nearly 1 million tons of carbon dioxide. In everyday terms, that's about 173,000 passenger vehicles driven for a year, or 100,000 homes' energy use for a year. Looking down at publicly owned land locally, on the left you can see here this broken down by city departments. And then on the right you can see the capacity when Minneapolis parks are considered. So there's a lot of green space in our parks, and then in the city alone there's the capacity to sequester thousands of tons of carbon within our land. But I wanted to get a fuller picture of what biochar could do for the entire city, and there is also a lot of potential in privately owned land. So if we look at the city of Minneapolis, in terms of land use, there's a lot of single-family detached homes. And these single-family homes have large lots, have a lot of green space, and have the capacity to sequester a lot of carbon. So as you can see on here, Minneapolis Parks looks almost like nothing when you compare the residential land that is included. So as we move forward thinking about biochar, we need to be critical about thinking about the markets that we'll target, and those should include homeowners, landscape architects, and other people in privately owned land. Next, moving on to urban forestry. The city of Minneapolis is trying to increase our urban tree canopy to 40% in 2040. There's a lot of factors that go into making it hard for trees to grow. There's not a lot of space. Urbanization has diminished our soil quality. There's been topsoil removal as well as soil compaction. So as we work to increase the canopy, we want to make sure that the trees that we do plant thrive. The city of Stockholm has been experimenting with biochar in their trees for the past decade. They've planted almost 1,000 trees with biochar. On the left here, you can see a tree that was planted, or that was in 2002, and then it was remediated with biochar, and the same tree is on the right in 2013. They found that 6-year-old trees planted with biochar were to be up to 5 times larger than 30-year-old trees planted with traditional techniques. So we shouldn't underestimate the potential of biochar added to our trees. Moving on to stormwater management, as Minneapolis prepares for climate change and intensification of the water cycle, we want to make sure our stormwater systems are able to perform their best. When biochar is added to stormwater systems, it increases resiliency, removes contaminants, and ultimately cleans surface water. So altogether, what this does is it reduces the risk of flooding, reduces the load on our stormwater systems, and it can remove pollution, in particular E. coli. It is able to remove E. coli up to 3 times more so than sand, and as you know, the city of Minneapolis has been struggling with some E. coli contamination over this past summer. And lastly, one of biochar's best uses is with soil remediation. So Minneapolis has already committed to improving soil health in the city. Policy 71 of the 2040 Comprehensive Plan is to take actions to protect and improve our soil's health. And groups have already started to work to incorporate biochar in soil remediation projects. So the Linden Hills Environment and Sustainability Committee has recently been working on a soil demonstration project on city-owned right-of-way land on the Linden Hills trolley path in an effort to educate neighbors on the benefits of healthier carbon-rich soil and how to create it. On the left, you can see before the remediation, and on the right is with the remediation that included biochar. And as you can see, the landscape has flourished. Now that I've outlined the full potential uses of biochar throughout the city enterprise, I want to note the importance of local production of biochar. The really exciting part of biochar is that you can take existing green waste that the city is currently paying to get rid of and turn it into a value-add product that helps take carbon out of our atmosphere and make Minneapolis a healthier place to live. However, this is dependent on the ability to produce it here in Minneapolis. The other important consideration is a need for a reliable feedstock, and we need to outline that. Of note, there may be up to 250,000 ash trees that could be incoming feedstock due to the emerald ash borer. So lastly, I just want to point out that Minneapolis has the opportunity to be a leader in this in the United States and also the world, and with the adoption of a carbon-negative technology at the city level. Overall, biochar is an investment that's good for the environment, people, and the city of Minneapolis. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that presentation. Do any of my colleagues have questions? Councilmember Schrader, or comments? Councilmember Schrader.
Sure, I'll be really brief. I know it's going to be hard to believe, but this may not be the most exciting thing we hear today. As excited as I am about biochar. But I first just want to thank you all for your work and let my colleagues know I'm really excited about the potential here. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to reach out to me as well. And I think it's kind of goes just to talk a little bit about the work you're doing and why the city is so engaged on this one solution, and just say it's one of many. We really need to stop thinking about just surviving climate change. You know, we need to stop thinking that if we just put solar on every roof and stop investing in natural gas, that everything's going to be okay. We need to create a more equitable city, and this is just one way to do it. Thanks again for your work.
Thank you. Councilmember Gordon.
I just want to thank you for the great presentation and all the work that you've contributed here. I understand your time with the city's ending soon, so we appreciate that, and outstanding presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really excited about this technology and really am grateful for you having spent so much time this summer, adding that bringing that Harvard education over. So thank you for bringing that to our health department. That's much appreciated. And we're definitely, as a council, we backed the resolution for increasing the use of this technology. And thank you so much for the details today. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. I would just offer a note of gratitude to Councilmember Schrader for really leading on this effort, as well as Mr. Doughton and the rest of his staff. And thank you for your work. Congratulations on presenting this information in front of a really large audience to help us get the word out about this exciting technology. So thank you very much.
I used to be a teacher, so I feel like I'm responsible for grading. That was like a 97%. So congratulations. Thank you so much for your presentation. Much appreciated. Echoing the gratitude to Councilmember Schrader for his leadership. So next up, we're going to be moving to today's public hearing, which is the passage of an ordinance amending Title 13, Chapter 267 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances related to licenses and business regulations, amusements, adding and amending provisions related to places of adult entertainment. With that, who will be doing this presentation? All right. Thank you so much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Daniel Huff. I am the Environmental Health Director here in the Minneapolis Health Department. Today I will be joined by Dr. Spranke from Minnesota State University at Mankato, as well as Ms. Melander from the University of Minnesota. First of all, a little bit of background. We have 17 licensed establishments in Minneapolis that are licensed as adult entertainment. 14 of these offer live, nude, or semi-nude dancing. And in most clubs, the entertainers are considered independent contractors, not employees of the club. I'm going to give you an idea of this project, since this has been a sort of an ongoing project for 2 years. It started in 2016 when the health department received complaints both from our colleagues within the city, business licensing staff, as well as from the public about unsanitary conditions in some of our adult entertainment establishments. In February of 2017, the Minneapolis Health Department conducted environmental health inspections within those clubs. And concurrent with that, the University of Minnesota, that Ms. Melander will discuss, conducted a study reaching out to entertainers to learn more about their experiences working in clubs.
Mr. Huff, I actually have a question from Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. Mr. Huff, you, in your opening statements, said there are 17 adult entertainment establishments, and most of those employees are considered contractors. How many of those facilities have employees?
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President, I know of one club in particular that does have their entertainers as employees. Most give the option. Either they can become an employee or an independent contractor. I do not know the specific number. However, I know it is the majority of the clubs. The entertainers act as independent contractors. That is information we could follow up and provide you later on.
Thank you.
I also just wanted to say, to the crowd that we will be having a public hearing where folks will be able to speak for 2 minutes. If you're interested in speaking, please sign up over here by the committee clerk. Irene, can you raise your hand so folks know? And this public hearing is specific to this item. So if that's what you would like to speak to, then please sign up. Floor is back to yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Then in the fall of that year, we conducted follow-up environmental health inspections. Over the winter, we conducted policy research within the city. Then in spring, both the University of Minnesota UROC as well as Minnesota State University of Mankato conducted additional research engaging with entertainers, learning more about the workplace experiences and getting feedback on those policy options. We then met with all of the different adult entertainment establishments, representatives from each of those, to get their feedback as well. And then this spring, winter and spring, we've been involved in ordinance development and feedback sessions. So just to frame the whole timeline. So it started really in those inspections that we conducted back in 2017, where we found would have been commonly termed stains of concern, where we had 11 of those clubs, we had confirmed semen stains, and then after orders and then subsequent inspections, 9 were confirmed through our tests. That showed us that there are some environmental health exposures that we were concerned about. As part of that, we wanted to get a much better idea of what was happening within the club, what are the other workplace or occupational safety issues of concern, and that's where our colleagues at the research institutions were invaluable. So at that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Melander so that she can discuss the research from the University of Minnesota. Thank you.
Hi there, Chairperson Cunningham and council members. Thank you so much for having us today and for hearing this presentation, for hearing this issue. So my name is Christina Melander. I work as a research fellow at the University of Minnesota's Urban Research Outreach Engagement Center, also known as UROC. This study was led by Dr. Lauren Martin, who is not able to be here today. So the study that we did was really an exploratory study, a mixed methods study to try to understand what are the strengths and concerns for entertainers in their workplace, and also to try to understand what works well for them and what are the solutions that they have to address some of those workplace concerns. We used a community-based approach, which we believed was necessary for this study, knowing that a lot of entertainers face stigma in the workplace and in society, that prior work as an entertainer can harm someone's future job prospects. And so anonymity and safety, dignity, and respect were really core components of how we approached this project. We assembled a community advisory group of industry stakeholders to help co-advise the work, to co-advise the research project. Just briefly about our methods. So we did qualitative confidential interviews with 24 individuals. And then on online survey, we had 29 individuals participate in the online survey. And it was really important that we had different ways of participating because we know that for a lot of individuals, anonymity is really important to being able to share their workplace concerns or what also works well for them. I'd also like to highlight the importance of anonymity as we are here today presenting to council members that even this itself is not the best venue for a lot of entertainers to be presenting and to be sharing because of the lack of anonymity that this type of environment affords. Between the interviews and the surveys, we did learn about workplace conditions in all of Minneapolis strip clubs. We were able to engage people across race, age, and other demographic backgrounds. And this was an exploratory study in 2016. We know that more in-depth research is needed to continue to explore some of the concerns that were presented. So just a few brief highlights of some of the workplace findings. One, we actually used an OSHA, modified OSHA survey for the online anonymous survey, finding a lot of occupational health and safety concerns related to physical injuries, potential exposure to bodily fluids, and physical and sexual assault, as well as just cleanliness within clubs. Second piece is really related to financial exploitation. We found that in the form of participants describing wage theft, mandatory tipping of salaried staff that resulted in certain forms of favoritism within the clubs. Finally, there are unclear customer expectations that can lead to sometimes pressure for sexual activity within the clubs and a lack of support from management in these circumstances, again, that sometimes relates back to tipping practices. And in general, a culture where harassment and assault was tolerated and sometimes normalized. We also want to emphasize that we did see a lot of different variability within clubs and variability across entertainers' perspectives. Sometimes this is really related to institutionalized racism and power and privilege for folks who are people of color or have other marginalized identities. They may experience clubs in different ways. And then just to kind of wrap up some of our key findings here. So some of the major concerns that participants talked about, one was just a lack of training and clarity around the workplace expectations. A lot of entertainers do not actually have access to their work contracts. As being independent contractors, we heard very often that people might come in, sign a contract, but never get the chance to see what was in that contract again. We also heard people talk again about customer behaviors that can sometimes be exploitative or derogatory, disrespectful, or assaultive. And this was most common in VIP spaces, and participants expressed a stronger desire for support with management around setting customer around these issues. And then finally, economic exploitation was probably the largest thing that participants also talked about, again, related to things such as house fees, arbitrary fines, and then the mandatory, what some individuals perceived were mandatory tipping practices. And then finally, we have heard a lot of concerns from advocates in social services related to trafficking within clubs. We wanted to help right-size our understanding of that issue and found that this is a minor concern within clubs in Minneapolis, simply related to, we know that trafficking happens in every industry, and so being able to talk to entertainers helped kind of right-size our understanding of that issue. So today, I know that you'll be hearing from a lot of different individuals, and I thank you for your time in hearing this issue. And now I'll pass it off to Dr. Eric Sprengel.
Thank you so much for that information. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, set up here. Good. Good afternoon, Council. I'm Eric Sprankle, an associate professor of psychology at Minnesota State University in Mankato, and a resident of Ward 8 in Minneapolis. For the past 2 years, my clinical psychology graduate students and I have had the honor and privilege of working with the Sex Workers Outreach Project of Minneapolis on a needs assessment examining workplace conditions in Minneapolis strip clubs. The research was collaborative, meaning that both the Minnesota State research team and members of SWAT Minneapolis were involved in each step of the project, from the study design to where we are now, advocating for change. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to share the research methods and results over the next few minutes. All right, our sample consisted of individuals who have worked as a dancer within the past 2 months in one of Minneapolis' strip clubs. Participants were recruited through personal contacts, on sites, at the clubs themselves, and on social media like Facebook and Twitter. In total, we had 62 dancers complete the survey, and of those, 33 elected to be interviewed more in depth about their working conditions pertaining to health and safety, pay structure, and relations with management and staff, among others. Looking at health and safety first, the majority of our participants were concerned about cleanliness. And I know the original concern by the city was about bodily fluids and stains of concerns in the VIP areas. However, our results indicated concerns about common communicable diseases like cold and flu virus transmitted from worker to worker, not customer to worker, in unkept shared areas. Of most concern was the cleanliness of the workers' private dressing areas and bathrooms, followed by the stage areas, and lastly by VIP spaces. Another consensus about cleanliness concerns was who was responsible for maintaining a clean working environment. Dancers felt this responsibility unfairly fell onto them and would prefer paid staff members working at the club to be held responsible for regularly cleaning shared areas. With safety, 77% of our sample were not concerned about safety with their interactions with customers. But almost half of our sample reported getting injured on the job from the physical structures of the club itself. Of top concerns were unsafe stage areas that may have splintered wood or broken glass, and flooring that may have carpet that is torn or uneven, creating tripping hazards. Like with cleanliness, dancers did not know who was responsible for the maintenance of these areas, and did not trust their complaints would be listened to if they were to complain to management. Lastly, a big concern among dancers was tipping of management and staff, with 65% reporting it as mandatory. There were instances of workers being fired or not tipping their managers enough, as well as fear of termination if the policy was unclear. Among the 35% who reported it wasn't required to tip managers, they still tipped due to favoritism. It was reported managers and staff would treat dancers differently depending on whether they tipped or not, and based on how much they tipped. Among all the data we collected, the biggest consensus was a belief that tipping management is an unfair labor practice, as it leads to financial exploitation, favoritism, and discrimination, and therefore should be banned. Having reviewed the proposed ordinance relating to the sections on health, structural safety of the club, and pay structures, it is aligned with the results from the study, and therefore I support its passage. I believe it will improve working conditions and increase the well-being of the workers at Minneapolis strip clubs. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for that information. Ms. Propp, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Sprankle. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. So first of all, I wanted to actually read this because I think it's just important to frame the value statement upon which policymakers and staff approach this ordinance development. Entertainers in Minneapolis are engaged in illegal work and deserve workplaces that protect their safety and dignity and allow them to make a living without exploitation, discrimination, or abuse. With that guiding principle or value, this is the following parts of this ordinance. First of all, just to address the physical concerns of the facilities, make sure that there are no tripping or other physical safety hazards, ensure that there are enough restroom fixtures within the restrooms, lavatories, water closets, as outlined by OSHA, and then minimum illumination standards. Many of the clubs are quite dark, and this would be at 1 foot candle per inch. Also, looking at our physical space, one of the things that we found is that there was a direct correlation between the VIP spaces and where we found positive tests for human semen. And so just some outlining guidelines here that the physical partition should not be greater than 5 feet tall, that you should be able to, security or anyone in the club should be able to have an unobstructed view within the partition. Seating must be all cleanable, non-porous material, and that proper standard operating procedures must be developed in accordance with OSHA on how to clean up any bodily spills. Sorry about that, didn't click. And then around general security, rules should be posted for the conduct of customers, and that these rules should be posted in general, but also specifically in each of the VIP or semi-private areas of the club. Security cameras must cover all areas of the venue, not in the dressing rooms, but rather where entertainers interact with customers, and that footage must be made available for review by the licensing official if requested. And then in accordance with state law prohibiting tip pooling of employers, managers and owners are prohibited from accepting tips from entertainers. And at the end of the shift, entertainers are to be provided a walkout by security so that they do not risk harassment or assault at the end of their shift. And that written contracts must be provided at both at time of hire and upon request by the entertainer by the place of business. Additionally, anti-harassment and anti-discrimination procedures and materials must be provided at the time of hire, and that annual training should be provided for all employees in the club on harassment and discrimination. And venues must post the rights of workers, and all of this should be approved by the licensing official as to how it looks. No managers or security staff shall have been convicted of qualified domestic violence-related offense within the past 5 years. That's the ordinance, just to give you a summation of the process. The city, through our university partners, conducted outreach to entertainers. We met with individually with adult entertainment industry representatives. This was presented to the Workplace Advisory Council of the city and received feedback there. And ongoing sessions were held with Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Palmisano, the authors, with both the entertainers as well as business representatives. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do any of my colleagues have any comments or, well, I'll just ask if there's any questions for Mr. Huff. All right. We'll save our comments for after the public hearing. Great. So we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. And again, I would like to reiterate that this public hearing is specifically for this item. If you are not on the list to speak to this item, I ask for you to please recuse yourself from the list. This is meant to be a space for folks who are impacted by this particular ordinance change. So I will, if you are not here to speak to that, I ask for you to please not speak during this public hearing unless it's related to this item. So first up, I'll call 3 folks at a time, so when you're on deck or next in line, if you'll please line up so we can move through. First up, we have Brad Schaefer, followed up by Kirsty Borer, and then Monica Sheets on deck.
You want me to go?
Yes, everybody has 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead and
I'm here as a representative of Deja Vu, Dream Girls, and Spearman Rhino. I want to thank the council and their staff for taking a great deal of time. I've been to 2 meetings. My partner's been to another meeting, and we've had a lot of input, and I appreciate listening to the input and where appropriate, making changes to the ordinance. The only thing I wanted to address is one of the things, Councilman Gordon, that I spoke to you about at the meeting that I was there with you and then with your staff member a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. Time flies. There are construction changes in this ordinance that the clients are going to have time to comply with. Not only the furniture changes, I had pointed out in the meeting you and I were at that Deja Vu just bought all new furniture before this ever came out, and they should get a chance to get their new furniture in line. And with regard to the construction of the booths and things like that, that's going to take some time to do. So I don't know if that's appropriate to address in the ordinance, or in the last meeting I was at with your staff member, they said like some type of side guidance to the inspectors or something, but I just ask that that be given some consideration and we have reasonable time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Kirsty Borer, followed by Monica Sheets. And again, I just want to say, if I butcher your name, I preemptively apologize. And then next on deck, we have Steve Belfort.
Thank you, and thank you for pronouncing my name correctly. I appreciate this opportunity. I do support this ordinance. When I was 18, I worked in a strip club. I was given a contract to sign and never saw it ever again after that. I was told I would be trained in the Showgirl of the Year. That sounds very glamorous. Trained me in, and she told me customers could not touch me, that I had to stay at least 10 inches away from the customer, which was confusing because I could see girls sitting on the laps of different customers and a lot of touching happening. So I was very confused by the rules I was told. The other rule she told me was to take my heels off before I did a couch dance, not to poke holes in the upholstery. So there wasn't a lot of detail to her training. I was left to figure all of that rest of it out on my own. The first time I was physically assaulted by a customer, I stood up shocked because I had worked in a restaurant and a donut shop and retail, and I knew there were certain laws that don't get broken. So I immediately jumped up. The customer laughed at me, the bouncer laughed at me, and the manager told me, "Don't let that happen to you again." Why did you let that happen? So there were a lot of confusing messages happening. I didn't know who to turn to if I was assaulted again. According to a study that Beautiful in Love did with people who used to work in the strip club, and I would just want to point out distance is important when reflecting on a situation like this, that 85% of them, 81% said that they had experienced some sort of sexual or verbal assault within the club more than once. And there's no support to know where to go with that, what to do with that within the club walls. I also did have to, when the club I worked in, when we cashed out, the manager would call out loud for everyone to hear what each dancer made, which caused, I'm done. All right.
You can wrap up your last.
Oh, okay,
last
thank you.
sentence. Yeah.
It caused competition and an unsafe, again, environment. And I did write a much more detailed testimony that I did turn in. So please take the time to read that. It outlines unfair fees that seem to come out of the blue, and as well as intimidation. I did feel intimidated to tip the manager. It was the only way you were gonna feel safe in that environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for submitting your statements. Next up, we have Monica Sheets, followed by Steve Bifford, followed by John Albersi.
Hi, and again, thank you for taking our testimony. So I am a former dancer, and I am a socially engaged artist working on a project with dancers called the Feminist Strip Club, where we're looking at the current conditions of and utopian visions for what stripping can be. I'm here today to support the ordinance because so much of it is simply common sense worker protection. Specifically, the idea that dancers should be able to get a copy of their contracts. As an artist, I work as an independent contractor all the time. That's the majority of how my work happens. And I'm always given a copy of the contract. And often I'm given a copy of that contract in advance in order to review it and approve it. So I think it's simply common sense that dancers should be able to, ask for that contract, see it, and not feel intimidated, not be seen as a threat, or in some cases also blacklisted for wanting to know the conditions under which they're laboring and, what are the rules of the club, as opposed to hearing them in this sort of, secondhand way that you never really know whether this is an actual rule or not. Secondly, obviously most important to me, is tipping out to management and owners. It's a blatant conflict of interest when those people are directly controlling access to work. It also perpetuates the inequality, particularly racial inequalities that exist in tip-based industries. And it's also particularly offensive that workers who are not getting paid, who are not getting a wage, are then being expected to take the money that they earn and give it to workers who are already earning a wage from the club. So I think that the ordinance is an important first step in addressing the labor issues that we have in the industry. And it's an industry that, of course, yes, is often ignored because of the stigma around it. I'm hoping to see that the ordinance gets passed, and I'm also anxious about how it's going to be enforced as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Steve, followed by John, and then Jay Swift on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and council members. My name is Steve Beffert. Close. Yeah. I teach at the University of Minnesota Law School, teach labor and employment law subjects. And amongst my areas of study has been the plight of precarious workers, individuals, particularly independent contractors, who have less clout in the workplace and tend to be exploited in the workplace. Now, the issue about, the principal issue with independent contractors is they are not subject to the same protections that employees are. So take, for example, the issue of tips. Minnesota state law says that no employer may require an employee to share a gratuity. So that's already on the books. The problem is that most of these dancers are classified, whether rightly or wrongly, as independent contractors. And what the ordinance attempts to do is extend to independent contractors the same rights that state law provides to employees. And it actually goes a step further. Not only can an employer not require tip sharing, it cannot accept tips from an employee or an independent contractor. And I think this will go a long way towards ending what Monica just talked about with financial exploitation, discriminatory treatment, and feminization of poverty, because this is largely a female-dominated group of workers. So I urge the passage of the ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for bringing that expertise. Next up, we have John, followed by Jay Swift, and then Eric Swarble.
Good afternoon. My name is John Albanese. I'm a lawyer at Berger Montag here in Minneapolis. I represent employees and consumers in lawsuits against companies, and me, along with other lawyers I've worked with, have represented entertainers in numerous lawsuits against clubs alleging that the clubs had misclassified the entertainers as independent contractors. You know, the employment laws in this country draw, as our previous speaker was just saying, draw a distinction between independent contractor and employee, where employees receive numerous protections and independent contractors receive almost none. When entertainers have challenged their classification, more often than not, the court has found that the entertainers were misclassified and should have been considered employees. Unfortunately, in recent years, most clubs and employers around the country have required as a condition of work that workers sign contractual agreements that any disputes related to their employment be forced into a private arbitration and also be forced to proceed on an individual rather than class or collective basis, which limits the ability of the worker to meaningfully challenge whether they are being classified as meaningfully challenged whether they're being misclassified. So and it's greatly affected my ability to represent those workers because the economics of it start to not make any sense. So I applaud the council for taking this up, and I think it provides a number of basic protections that should be any worker in Minnesota should be entitled to, regardless of whether they're classified as an independent contractor or employee. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Jay Swift, followed by Eric S., and then Tara Hernandez.
Hi, thank you, Council. So I've had the chance to meet with some of you previously in my capacity as one of the organizers of the Minneapolis chapter of the Sex Workers Outreach Project and was one of the authors of the study that Eric just spoke about. I am also a researcher that focuses on commercial sex economies and cultures, and I have worked in adult entertainment here and elsewhere. Dancers face very entrenched forms of labor exploitation, discrimination, and harassment. And I would ask that you would read our study, UROC's study, or read the submitted testimony to learn more about those problems in dancers' own very powerful words. What I have to say today is this. City government has historically contributed to these problems. Erotic dance has traditionally been regulated through one of two ways: obscenity and zoning measures. For too long, adult entertainment has been seen as a social nuisance or problem, something to cover up, contain, or curb. As a result, the regulatory gaze has been myopically focused on the bodies and actions of dancers, and it has failed to scrutinize management and ownership practices. Zoning policies that favor megachurches and property owners have contributed to unhealthy degrees of monopolization within the industry, both locally and nationally. These approaches have an effect on dancers' working conditions. When erotic dance is treated as a public embarrassment, workers find very little help in their struggles with an exploitative pay structure, racist management, or harassment. You all collectively hold the power to address these wrongs. This ordinance is a necessary first step towards mandating the things that many workers take for granted, the things that Monica has spoken about, the things that others will speak about, mandatory contracts. I'll just say this. We know that law and policy alone cannot end economic exploitation or discrimination. But what this ordinance does is change the legal conditions so that workers actually have a chance to advocate for their collective best interests, and it introduces transparency and accountability into our workplaces. Like others doing society's dirty work, this is a feminized, racialized, and stigmatized industry. So standing with erotic dancers is a matter of gender, racial, and economic justice. Minneapolis has the capacity to lead the nation in a new direction toward a labor and human rights approach to regulating adult entertainment. And what I see before me is a city council that can do that. And I commend you for considering this measure, and I urge you to pass it.
Thank you, Dr. Swift. Next up, we have Eric Swarble, followed by Tara Hernandez, and Brittany Rinelli on deck.
I don't. Oh.
Oh, got it. Well, thank you for your information that you've already provided. Next up, we have Tara Hernandez, followed by Brittany Rinelli, and then Dina Talamantes.
Good afternoon. I am currently a dancer. I work at Downtown Cabaret. I've actually been in the business for 15 years. I've worked everywhere from Spearmint Rhino in Las Vegas to Spearmint Rhino here, Deja Vu, Dreamgirls, Seville, you name the club, I probably worked there. For the 15 years that I've worked there, I have at maybe a handful of times experienced some sort of harassment, but it wasn't anything that I was afraid for my well-being. There was always management on the floor that was able to, the minute you are in any sort of an environment where you don't feel safe, you immediately get up and you leave. Management is right there to walk in. I've never had an issue with it. There's so much, you could be working in a normal place and experience some sort of harassment. And there's a lot of times I worked in actual being an employee and experienced harassment where nothing happened. The biggest issue I have right now is I'm an independent contractor. I'm not an employee. I am not required to tip management. However, it is, to me, fair. They're there to protect us. They're there to help us when in need. I tip them based off of that. But technically, we're not, you or nobody else can tell us whether or not we can tip or not because we are an independent contractor. Employees are not required or even allowed to tip management, but you're coming in trying to tell us that we can't tip management. As an independent contractor, I am perfectly able to tip management when wanted. A lot of the girls had talked about training. As an independent contractor, if we come in and are trained, we are then labeled as an employee. So there is no training. You come in as you are, otherwise don't work there, I guess. We are an independent contractor. So the biggest issue I have with this is we are independent contractors, we're not employees, and a lot of this ordinance is placing us as employees. If there are dancers that have issues with the cleanliness, with the structures, with things that they're wanting, maybe chip in financially to the club. If it's something that you want changed, talked about. Again, my biggest issue with this is the independent contractor issue and also the cameras in our private dances. That you guys talk about exploitation, that's exploitation in itself. I do not feel comfortable with that whatsoever. And I don't agree with a lot of the ordinance and what it entails.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing. Next up, we have Brittany Rinelli, followed by Dana Talamantes, with Ramona on deck.
All right. Hi, my name is Brittany Rinelli. I work at 4 clubs. Well, I've worked at 4 clubs downtown Minneapolis, also outside of the state. One of my main concerns is the tipping also. I think it is very fair for tipping because my management are always there for whatever I need. I've never felt unsafe. As far as like the contracts too, I can always get a contract. It's always on, sorry, I'm really nervous. I'm always able to get the contract if I ask for it, so I don't see that as ever being a problem. Yeah, sorry. Also, the private room thing, I've never had a bad experience with the private rooms. We can always leave whenever we want to. If we don't feel comfortable, the managers always are there to back us up. Yeah, sorry, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dana, followed by Ramona with Adriana on deck.
Hi, my name is Dina Talamantes, and I'm a house mom at Downtown Cabaret. I've been in the industry for nearly 20 years, service industry, restaurant management, you name it. Previous to my experience at Downtown Cabaret, I experienced harassment of every way, shape, or form, whether it's in the kitchen, from a busboy, from management, from a patron, just at your normal restaurants that we all go to. Since my time at Downtown Cabaret, I was surprised of the zero tolerance there is for harassment or any type of talk, whether it be to a dancer or even me, a house mom. My function as a house mom is to take care of whatever needs our women may have to make their job easier, provide anything they may have forgot for work, from feminine products to outfits, or answer any questions new dancers might have to make them feel secure and know their rights or what they have access to at work. I also provide food for the girls, which is, again, they can tip me if they want to, but I provide that at no cost. So whether they made money or however their night was, they can get a meal. A lot of times I even send food home for girls to make sure that they're okay at home. I have radio contact with management and security at all times for an extra measure of security in the dressing room or any place I am at the club working with a girl. But most importantly, I'm a sincere, caring ear to come to, a shoulder to cry on for whatever they may have going on outside of work as well, or anything they might be struggling with. I'm almost a therapist. I can honestly say I love my job and the women I work with. With everything I've done, I'm 40 years old, and I don't see myself doing anything else. I'm very happy and can't imagine not working with these women. I understand girls have had experiences at clubs that may need to be addressed, and those things should be addressed. In my opinion, I feel like that should be addressed on a club-to-club basis and not as a whole. One of the biggest senses of securities that the women I work with have relayed to me at Downtown Cabaret is that when it comes to private rooms, the rules are relayed to the patrons via the dancers, and anytime they feel any type of threat or just even uncomfortable, not only is the room done, it's shut down, but they're still paid for their time regardless of how a patron may conduct themselves.
If you could wrap up your last thought here, that'd be appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. My point is, none of the clubs are the same. It's just like all the restaurants are different, all the clubs are different, and that needs to be addressed on a club-to-club basis. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So I'm gonna pause the public hearing here. I'm sorry, just give one quick second. Are you Ramona?
Yes.
Okay, Ramona, if you give us one quick second. Council Vice President Jenkins has to leave, and she would like to speak to the item before she heads out to her next commitment. So we will give her a couple minutes to speak, and then we'll pick up where we left off.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham, and my apologies, Ramona. And to all of you, I have a dental appointment that I have to attend, and so my apologies. However, I do want to just express my support for this ordinance and really this, I think, just one step forward for workers' rights, but certainly for sex workers' rights. I think passing this is certainly a step in that direction to really lift up and support all sex workers and really try to have some sane public policy around a very important part of our culture and society. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Vice President. All right. Ramona, you're up, followed by Adriana with Karen Clark on deck.
Hello. I am one of the organizers with SWAT Minneapolis and one of the authors for the needs assessment survey that was spoken about previously. I stand before you to support this ordinance with the knowledge that I'm taking a sizable risk, professionally and personally, due to stigma and unchecked retaliation from clubs should I find myself trying to get hired at a Minneapolis club in the future. I also experience tremendous privilege in this industry. As a white cis woman, I want to acknowledge that these risks will always be smaller for me. It is for this reason that I am able to be here today, and many were not. The repercussions for people with identities that are different than my own are much heavier in consequence. I do not wish to speak for these individuals. However, I want to make sure that their voices are heard. This industry exists as a microcosm of greater society and therefore is rife with structural racism, misogyny, and classism. You will hear that in this industry many different experiences and that they differ widely across identities.
You may even experience hearing different opinions on parts of the ordinance, particularly when examining the clause about regulating the tipping of management. This practice, of course, does benefit some. It creates an atmosphere of favoritism, often favoring dancers who are predominantly white. This is why it was important that we gathered data from dancers anonymously from all identities, as well as be critical about how our individual privileges shaped our experiences in the industry. This clause, among other parts of the ordinance, such as a clean workspace, reasonable worker-to-toilet ratio, should be expectations in the workplace and exist in language for every industry except for ours. I believe that this ordinance will create a standard for working conditions to uphold to, and more importantly, an opportunity to hold clubs accountable for treatment that is not or should not be tolerated in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Adriana, followed by Karen Clark, with Cassandra Holmes on deck.
Good afternoon. I was not prepared to speak today, honestly. I did not come with a long list of things. I do want to speak on behalf of what I do, and I work at Downtown Cabaret. I host, I'm a server as well, and I can only attest to the conditions that I work in and what I see on a daily basis. We have a team atmosphere. We work together. I don't see anything that's being brought up today, specifically in our club, and I do feel like this should be addressed on a club-by-club basis, because I do understand that there are things that occur within this industry. I have been in this industry for about 3 years, coming from corporate, working in top corporate companies in Minnesota. I love my job. I love the atmosphere. I love the people that I'm around. I feel safe. My managers make sure that we get to where we need to go once we're leaving. If we are not, if we don't have the ability to drive or get to where we're going, they make sure that they arrange a town car to where we get to where we're going safely. I feel like the ordinance, specifically with the cameras and the private rooms, I feel like that is way too much. I feel like that's exploitation in itself. I mean, who's watching these videos? Why would that be required? These women have the option to work in this industry. I have the option to go back to my corporate job if I have to. They have the option to do other things for means of money. If it was such a hindrance on their life, and they're having all of these issues, they have a choice. They have a choice. They do not have to do this. They do not have to subject themselves to whatever they're experiencing. Me specifically, in our environment where we are, again, just to touch base, I love what I do. I don't experience this where I work. I'm understanding that there is issues within the field. I, again, think it should be something that's addressed on a club-by-club basis.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for speaking.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Karen Clark, followed by Cassandra Holmes, with Steve Sandberg on deck. Okay.
I'm going to yield my time to Cassandra Holmes.
Hello, my name is Cassandra Holmes. I'm from Little Earth of United Tribes, and I do not mean to diminish the importance of this ordinance or the workers, because I support them and their ordinance they're asking for. But I will recuse ourselves because I thought this was public health and civil rights and engagement. So I came up thinking I could talk about the East Phillips Indoor Urban Farm and the pollution that site will be causing us. So I'm hoping
So this is a public hearing specifically for this item. It's not a public hearing for all topics.
When will it be up? When will it be for all topics, I guess is my question.
So when we have public hearings, our public hearings are typically specific for the items that come before it. We don't have public hearings that are just open to all topics. What I would recommend is to talk to the council member for the area, and then we can have further conversations from there, because this public hearing
Yep.
is attached to a specific item.
I understand that. That's why I said I didn't want to diminish the importance
Nope,
of that,
I
and I
understand.
support them. So Alondra Cano, I guess I should be asking her then when we can have that conversation, and hope to hear from her. So,
That would be my
okay,
recommendation.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Next up, we have Steve Sandberg, followed by Andy, with Alexis Collins on deck.
Yes, I see the sign say Minneapolis supports strippers, and I think that's great. I know that Minneapolis also supports environmental justice. Minneapolis also supports public health, clean air, and again, as you all know, we went around and asked every member of this
Is
committee.
this speaking to this item that we are opening the public hearing for?
Public health, yes.
No,
And,
this is specifically for the
and you were all
entertainment.
You were all in favor, but
Excuse
we
me?
are not. And you were all in favor of our request for an environmental assessment worksheet for the pollution
I'm not sure
site
what
in
you're,
our-
what
in our
specifically you're
neighborhood.
speaking of,
And
but
so I'm
that is
asking-
not
I'm
attached to
asking
this
you-
particular.
I'm asking you to please
This is
allow
not
us
attached
to
to the
have a
particular
hearing
item
for
that we
this.
are talking about
Thank you.
today. Thank you. Next up, we have Andy, followed by Alexis Collins, with Valentina McKenzie on deck.
Hi, I'm Andy. I'm definitely here for this ordinance. I've been working really hard with some members of the council and with Dan from the health department and with my team from SWAP Minneapolis. If y'all don't know, SWAP is a national organization that advocates for the human rights of sex workers. When we found out that Cam was taking this project on, we got really invested and really interested. We read the UROC report, and there was like little things in there about the financial abuses that happen in the clubs. And we were like, that's the real story. That's what needs to come to light. That's what we can highlight through the people that we know. Thank you all. And it's a really exciting opportunity to get to explain all of this to you and to speak in front of you today. And I have to say there's a lot of misunderstanding of what is in the ordinance from some of the people that presented today. I'm not going to go over it point by point, but I mean, Cam can tell you all, like, this is a very complicated issue, and how things got to be this way in the strip club, and these, like, sort of, like, structural, like, things that we're dealing with are very unique. And we just want you all to know that we are very available to answer any questions and to explain why some of this is important. I have also been dancing for 16 years. Most of that has been here in Minneapolis. It's a really unique situation. We have a really unique opportunity to do something great. Like Cam said, we can do something innovative that really benefits dancers, that really like frames this as a labor rights issue, which it absolutely is. And a lot of people touched on this as being a human rights issue, absolutely. And all I really want to say from my 16 years of experience is that my coworkers mean the world to me, and they are my chosen family, and they are some of the most amazing people in the world. And a lot of this stuff that's in the ordinance might seem like small potatoes, like real common sense kind of things, but it is going to make a world of difference in our lives every single day, and it's going to improve lives of people I care very deeply about. So for that reason especially, I urge you to vote yes for this ordinance, and please contact us if you have any questions at all. And I mean that from the people from DTC and y'all and everybody, because there's a lot of misunderstanding, and we are here for dancers. Know that.
Thank you, Andy. Next up, we have Alexis, followed by Valentina, with Rebecca on deck.
Hello, I'm Alexis Collins. I'm here because I agree with the ordinance. I started dancing about 2 years ago, off and on, and like when I got hired, I was young, I was 18, 19, so when I got hired, they was telling me all the rules, like, yeah, you have to pay everybody out, you have to do this, you have to do that. So I used to ask the girls, like, so what happens if you don't do it? They're like, oh, you get your hours cut, or you be blacklisted, or they'll put you out on the spot when it's like dead and nobody really comes. And like, it is a safety issue because some clubs, their floors are like bad and it's slip and fall hazards, and they just like, do better, give up. If you get up, just wipe it off, you'll be okay. And like, on top of that, like me being African American, there's some clubs I went to that will only allow us 2 African Americans to be there at midnight or to be there at a certain time, saying that they mostly want Caucasian women out there, and that's where the most money comes at. So there's like degrading us, like we're not good enough to do what everybody else been doing. And like, I still do it off and on again, but I get a little nervous now because some of the guys, they wait till you leave the club and they'll like watch you walk to your car. So now like I feel like I have to bring a guy with me. If I bring a family member or a brother or somebody that's like I know that's going to protect me, it's like, and it's just like really sad that I feel like I can't do what I'm supposed to do, like to make a better living. Like I understand they said if you feel unsafe, you can find a different job and stuff, but it's like same as you do this to make fast money, easy money, because you still get money at the end of the day. That's what I need to do too. Like, but we shouldn't have to find a different job because we're getting harassed or we're getting assaulted, and like they feel like the laws, it doesn't matter which, it's here to protect everybody. And like, even though it don't happen to you, it can happen to you, and the law's not in place, and you disagreeing with it when it happens to you, then what is going to happen? Like, how are you going to feel about it? And you're going to be feeling really bad, like, dang, I should have listened and went along with the law. So pretty much I'm just saying I'm here to agree with the law because everybody should be safe for what anything they do, regardless if they're a stripper or host or anything. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Alexis. Next up is Valentina, followed by Rebecca with Eli on deck.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Gordon, for bringing this ordinance forward. I have worked here at Minneapolis clubs, also out of town. I know upon signing my first contract that that's the only time I ever seen it, and I literally had it in my hand for maybe about 2 minutes, did not take the time to read it over, and turned around and had asked for a copy of it, was told that they do not give out copies of our contracts. After that, I was also told that we are not, it's like the untold rule to tip management, and I asked, well, if it's an unsaid rule, it's not necessarily in writing, then that means I don't have to do it. Was told by several other dancers that if I didn't do it, that I would be blacklisted and not being able to work at any other clubs here, and that basically blacklist would continue no matter where I decided to dance. There are several tripping hazards. I know the dressing rooms are completely disgusting. We were asked like to please clean up behind ourselves, things of that sort. After a long night of dancing, it's the last thing that you're thinking about is cleaning up behind yourself. So I do agree with having another company come in that is willing to take the time to clean things properly. Even if I did take the time to clean it properly, a lot of times the person before me did not. As Alexis had said as well with the racial disparities that are going on in the club, I've also been told too that, well, we don't have enough space to have 2 black girls on the same shift. Also, like, black people are less favorable inside of the club, so we already get less dances, we get less money earning, and any type of salary job that you're getting, you get salary regardless if you show up to work or not. If you are a manager at any other business, you're not getting tips along your salary, unless you're like maybe a CEO and getting bonuses and things of that sort. It's already written in law that it's unacceptable. With that, I'm going to say that we obviously know that laws are not doing anything unless we are absolutely enforcing them. So I highly suggest that you guys take deep consideration into how we are going to enforce this ordinance once it is passed, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Valentina. Next up, we have Rebecca, followed by Eli with Haley on deck.
Hi, thank you. My name is Rebecca Bailey. I'm a partner at Nichols Caster here in town. We represent employees and consumers, usually in class and collective actions for unpaid wages, and have throughout the years come to represent literally thousands of entertainers, both in Minneapolis, statewide, as well as across the country. And from the experience representing these workers, I can tell you that it's very difficult for entertainers to assert their rights for a health and safe work environment, as well as a lawfully compliant wage, free and clear of tip requirements. And it's primarily difficult for 2 reasons you've heard about today. One is the misclassification of dancers as independent contractors, where all of our labor and employment laws that we have at the state and federal level don't apply to these women. So in order to assert their rights, they first have to go to court or to arbitration and explain why they should be protected. It's an onerous process. I will tell you that oftentimes courts are finding they are truly, as a matter of law, employees regardless of what the club says, but that is a an additional hurdle they have to overcome that your restaurant server does not. The second large barrier is the prevalence of arbitration agreements inside these employment contracts, making it impossible for them to band together and assert their rights, because individually it might only be a few $1,000s of tips that they've diverted or unpaid minimum wages, but together it's an actionable claim. Those arbitration agreements require them to go individually to arbitration, which is secret, and so they can't necessarily publicize what's happening at the club and provide bad press and kind of force management to change. And these are things you're just not seeing in other industries. Sure, sex harassment exists in the restaurant level, but if a server is harassed at a restaurant, she has the right and ability to file a charge and to pursue her claim. That doesn't happen here today. So I commend the board for taking up this issue. It's a gaping hole, and it really needs city support and enforcement to make sure that these workers are protected.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Eli, followed by Haley Page, and then with Tony Williams on deck.
Hi, my name is Eli Edelson-Stein. I'm a resident here of Ward 10. I'm also an organizer with the Restaurant Opportunity Center with workers in another tip-based industry, in the restaurant industry. I'm here on behalf of many of our members who we've talked about this issue to speak to some similarities and power dynamics that we see as tipped-based workers. The requirement of tipping out and the theft of tips is not just an economic issue. It is also a power issue. If someone who controls which dances you get, which hours you work, and which shifts you're allowed is also someone that you are paying out at the end of a shift, there's clear incentive for you and a power dynamic that's reinforced. And I think that if there's no recourse at all, workers are left marginalized. I also want to speak that as these things are upheld, we're super familiar with a dynamic of the reality that there's a real risk to stand up here and tell you that things need to change when the folks that you're changing this for and who hold power will lose power. And there's huge risk for retaliation, and I just want to name that to come up here and say that I support the status quo is much easier because you're rewarded for that at work, and those that hold power continue to reward you for that. But to say that something needs to change because my life needs to change, and knowing that you're putting yourself on the line, I think you need to listen real close to that when you hear testimony for this. So we're here in support. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Eli. Next up, we have Haley, followed by Tony with Lula Lux on deck.
Hello, my name is Haley Page. I've been a dancer at Downtown Cabaret for 4 years. I'm also a local filmmaker, finished school at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, and I also work with Monica Sheets with the feminist sex worker group. And I would just like to say that when I started in the industry, I also did not understand why tipping management was not fair. I was one of the girls that thought, well, it makes sense if I pulled in $1,000 in a night, I should tip management, right? And the more you think about it, RCI Dining is a multi-million-dollar corporation. They own 3 different clubs in this city. And the problem with us tipping management is that RCI is paying their managers less because they know that we are going to be supplementing how much money they make. And the problem with that is we're dancers. I'm a college student with so many student loans to pay, and I need my money. When I was hired at Downtown Cabaret, I was told tipping is not required. Yet, I have been approached by management and been told the tip I received tonight was not enough. And then I've had to hand them money out of my wallet. And I know some girls have not had to deal with that in our industry, but that's the problem, is it's so individual based. If you're a girl who made all your money in VIP that night and you don't tip management, they're never going to hook you up with another client that will take you to VIP because they know they won't be getting a cut. During day shift, customers are allowed to be handsy because there's only 6 or 7 guys in, And the manager knows, well, if he kicks those guys out, then he's not going to make any money and the girls aren't going to make any money. So you have these new girls who are 18 years old, never been into a strip club before, get hired on day shift, and they have no idea how to combat handsy customers because the managers don't really enforce it. Night shift, I had to say, was a giant change. Managers were on it like that because there were, twice as many people in the club, but thank you.
Thank you, Haley. Next up, we have Tony Williams, followed by, Lula Lux with Emmeline on deck.
Thank you so much for having me today. My name is Tony Williams. I'm here today in solidarity with sex workers. I just want to say sex work is real work, and like all other work in the city, it needs to be equitable and fair. I want to commend the Sex Workers Outreach Project in the city for your strong work on this. There's a long history of discrimination against dancers and other sex workers in Minneapolis, from police brutality and extortion in the early 1900s to a lack of labor law protections now. This is a racial justice, gender justice, and queer justice issue. And I'm grateful to see that these protections are being considered, and I hope that it's only the start of many fruitful collaborations between the sex work community and the City Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tony. Next up is, what's your name? Layla. I couldn't read it. Layla, followed by Emmeline with Lakita on deck.
Hi, Chair Cunningham, I want to thank you guys for being here and listening to us today. And I am again here with solidarity with other sex workers, and I am a member of SWAP and the organizer of SWAP as well. I've been a member for the past 3 years, and I am coming to speak about mainly on discrimination and discrimination in the clubs, mainly, like I said, I've been in this industry for just over a year, and I have had the opportunity to only work in one Minneapolis club based on my identity and who I am and how I represent, and also have experienced a great deal of discrimination in the clubs, and also with the whole thing about tipping out and all that. It is a racial issue. It is an economic justice issue, and it's making things much harder and making things much more unsafe for us. We don't have the opportunity to have someone to walk us out of work. In my experience of any club that I've worked at in Minnesota, which when I traveled and the few times I've had the opportunity to travel, it's been much better, and I've been handed a contract, been able to read it, been able to get a copy if I've wanted to. All of that, which I said does not happen here in Minnesota. I have a lot of friends in the industry as well, and have heard a lot of different stories and experienced a lot of different things where, like I said, it is making things harder for us. We don't have the same things that we had in the past, and having to combat with people going against us based on their own experiences and only their one experience, how they have the favoritism in their club or how they have had a great experience. I think it's important, like I said, to listen to the experiences of people that are not in the middle about this thing, and how we can go forward and make change for the community as a whole. It doesn't have to be like everybody against the management, everybody against like all the people in management, but we can all work together to have a better community for all of us. So I'm here to stand upon that. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Layla. Next up, we have Emmeline, followed by Lakita. And if there's anybody else who would like to speak, please sign up over by the clerk. And I'm sorry, I want to apologize. I would like to welcome my colleagues, Councilmember Goodman and Palmisano. My apologies. The floor is yours.
Hi, I'm Emmeline O'Hara, and I am not a sex worker, but I'm a community member and have a lot of loved ones who are sex workers. And I just want to speak on behalf of this ordinance because as someone who is an independent contractor right now, I can only say that you lose so much as an independent contractor. I have no rights. I have nothing that I can do really to really advocate for myself. And I just think this is amazing and incredible work done by SWAP to organize for this ordinance. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lakita And I think we might have some other folks who have signed up, so we'll get that going here shortly.
Hello, it's Latika Rogers. It's okay. I didn't prepare a speech today, but I'm just speaking on behalf of Downtown Cabaret, where I've worked for 4 years. And personally, I understand that there's a lot of discrimination that does happen, and also just mistreatment of sex workers in clubs around Minneapolis. But I do also agree that it should be addressed club to club, because every club has its own kind of setting. And on my behalf, I believe that I've had a good and positive experience with the club that I work at. And I feel as though, as an independent contractor, it should be my choice whether I would like to tip or not. I've worked in the past in the restaurant industry as well as service industry, and I feel that as a bartender, if I would like to show my gratitude to my bar back, I am allowed to tip, and as a server, to show gratitude to my cooks, I am allowed to do that as well, but it is still my choice. I do not agree that it should be forced that I cannot tip if I'd like to my management, especially since I feel that they keep me protected as well as my fellow coworkers. And then as far as another piece of the ordinance with the zoning, I also don't agree with that. I feel as though that's also sort of a form of exploitation and control with having the cameras and being able to let the city have complete and total access to this. But yes, I would just like to say that my experience has not been as negative as I know some other women have experienced. And I do think that this should be something that is looked at individually as far as club to club. Thanks.
Thank you, Latika. Next up we have Haley M, followed by Isavia, and then with Colleen on deck.
Hi, thank you for hearing me today. I didn't plan on speaking, but since I'm here and I have a lot going on up here, I think I should tell you how I feel. We, as a whole, have a lot going on in this industry. I do think that this ordinance has some pros and some cons. Some of these things are in our best interest as a whole, and some I believe are not. I think that if we do choose to tip our management, that we should be able to do that. I just wish that, if that was the case, that then there was no expectation that we must tip. My management and the people I work for at my club, I do like to tip them because they are providing safety for us in the club. I don't know what I would do without them, but I know at some other clubs that some other girls are experiencing favoritism or racial issues. I think that the cameras and the change in the private rooms will make it so it's no longer private. I don't believe that for me, I don't want to be recorded, or I don't want to have the rooms changed to more other people can view it. If you take away the privacy aspect of it, we're also probably going to take a hit on our finances as well, because if you take the privacy out of the private room, the customer is no longer going to feel like it's private. We don't feel like it's private. It makes it uncomfortable. I don't know. I just feel like that is exploitation for us. I don't want to be recorded while I'm in a room that's supposed to be private. I also, like I said before, know that it is a much bigger issue than just me. I just think that not all of these things are beneficial for us. Some of them are, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Isavia. I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, followed by Colleen.
Hi, it's ACV. I don't fault you for not pronouncing it right, because no one can. I've been dancing. I'm at Surprise Downtown Cabaret. I've danced at another club as well, and I do understand that. Like I definitely understand why this tipping situation, why it is a big deal. I don't think that it should be. I don't think that it should be that I don't think it should be like mandatory that we shouldn't tip, because I don't believe that like RCI Dining as a whole. I don't think that they're gonna pay I don't think they're gonna pay like our managers like a higher. I don't think they're going to pay them any more than what like their salary, and I think that I think that they do help us. I don't think it's just like security. I think that like if I'm having a bad day or something like that, they help me with help me with customers or saying they'll help me like with stuff like that. As far as the rooms go, I don't think that changing the size of like the walls or adding cameras in there changes anything, because there's cameras already in the other parts of the other parts of the club, and there are no walls on the floor, and we still experience harassment. It's also I feel like it's taking away. It's putting the blame on the rooms and not the blame on the customers, and that's the thing, and I think that's what should be addressed. And I think that more emphasis should be on managers. Like if there is a situation, if a dancer does not feel safe, I think the managers should. They should make sure that they get that customer out and make sure that the dancer is safe. And I feel like that our managers at Downtown Cabaret 100% do that for us. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Next up, we have Colleen, followed by Laser with, I'm reading Mads on deck.
Hi, my name is Colleen, and I've worked at multiple clubs in Minneapolis. I appreciate the testimony acknowledging the power imbalance at work when we look at who was able to testify today and who was forced into hiding out of fear of retaliation. I want to say that eliminating tipping and other wage theft, as well as safety of the space, are by far my greatest concerns. Managers should be support resources for dancers, not our police. We need safe avenues to report violations of our boundaries or the law without fear of blame or coercion in return. So to me, enforcement doesn't look like lower walls or video surveillance. It looks like labor rights. This begins by eliminating their ability to leverage their willingness to support us in how well we tip. Furthermore, we shouldn't be paying any fees to the house at all, when we are really the only reason customers come to the club and make rational purchases in the first place. In addition to a steep cover charge, the club makes outrageous profits on bottles of cheap champagne, priced at 300% or more of their retail price, and $36 shots, which I and other staff are incessantly pressured to sell and retaliated against if we do not. No regular bar could get away with these markups and gratuitous fees, and regular bars are profitable businesses. Furthermore, they are profitable without stealing the tips of those who facilitate their sales and even pay their salespeople. The idea that the strip club would cripple financially without these wage theft practices is completely unfounded. The idea that they can't pay their employees better to compensate for the loss of these tips is unfounded. The staff who testified today should be on our side. We are all being exploited, and we are fighting for you too. I do fear economic and other retaliation against us by corporate club moguls in response to this law, and I urge you to keep this in mind. We will need support moving forward. It is only a first step in strengthening our rights to safer, more equal, and more democratic workplaces.
Thank you so much. Next up, we have Laser, followed by Mads, with Roxanne on deck.
Hi, I'm Laser. I have worked at strip clubs in Minneapolis and all over the country. And I've worked at clubs ranging from being like extremely exploitative to really well-run clubs. And also I have worked at clubs that have some of these measures in place. I've worked at clubs where you're not allowed to tip managers or owners or salaried employees. I've also worked at clubs with cameras in the VIP rooms. But what I really want to emphasize is that this ordinance will only help strippers. It will only help dancers. And I think that it's very important, especially if you're at a club that you feel good at, to stand in solidarity with dancers who don't have protections, who don't have a good situation, because that's a lot of them. Specifically, one of the clubs that I've worked at here, there was such a high degree of wage theft that it infuriated. I mean, I got fired because they fire anyone who won't put up with the status quo. I witnessed my friend get fired on the spot just for asking to see her contract. They're taking so much from us. Managers and owners do not need any more. I can't stand to see strippers being stolen from any more than we already are. And I support this ordinance 1,000%. Yeah, so I think it's important for those who have more privilege, like myself, for those who, get to work in these top tier clubs where, yes, you are treated a lot better and like they are well run and you are protected. It's important for us to also stand up for our fellow dancers who are experiencing racism, who are experiencing discrimination, who can't get hired because of fat-phobic managers, who are forced to work in the day shift and make less money. It's just, yeah. Thank you. I support this ordinance.
Thank you, Laser. Next up is Mads, followed by Roxanne with Miss RL on deck.
Hello, and thank you to the City Council for hearing on this ordinance. It's more than a little important, I think, and more people I wish were here because this is a very serious labor rights issue. I am not personally a stripper, but I am an organizer with SWAP Minneapolis. I would like to address a couple things that have come up regarding the use of cameras in private rooms in particular have been referred to as exploitative by many dancers. And I think that's very concerning to hear that they are worried about how that footage will be used, because I think that speaks less to their concerns of their personal safety and more to the power their managers hold over them. If they're concerned that their managers or other employees at the club are going to be watching these videos, that speaks miles to their safety within the club. Additionally, I believe the ordinance does not add cameras or require additional cameras. More so, it just regulates the use of existing cameras. I may be a little wrong on that. When it comes to tipping, I worked in tip industries. It's extremely important to note the incredible variance of wages that strippers in the city face. One day you might make $1,000, one day you might make nothing. And I've heard more than once from friends who have made negative money in a night because they've had to tip out managers. They've had to tip out people in the club. So I just wanted to note that, especially given the rise of cost of living in the Twin Cities, that having consistent wage and expecting to at least have something when you leave for the night is necessary just to be a working adult in the cities. Additionally, some clubs have dancers who want to tip their managers. I think that's wonderful that they have those experiences. I think it's amazing that they have that level of trust. However, that part of the ordinance is necessary to protect strippers and other clubs, to protect other dancers. If it's not in place, it's not going to work. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Roxanne, followed by RL.
Good afternoon. Is this on? Okay, mic check. So, my name is Roxanne. I put on my red dress today in support. And the reason why I'm here is because I heard that there was, some women who needed support who worked in the entertainment business. And I'm actually an environmental justice advocate, so I was really excited for y'all that you came down here to fight for your rights, and I really have a lot of respect for y'all in both sides. I do want to say I'm in favor of the ordinance. I was told to come today by a community member that has supported me in the past through police pursuits and other issues going on. And again, I heard about this because I was looking for some support from strippers who could possibly do a direct action with me around environmental justice, because I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a law called amortization, which it allows a community to push out a stripper facility if they don't want it in their community. And I work on getting pollution out of my community, and unfortunately we cannot use that law like other states use that law to push out polluters only for stripper establishments. So I don't know if you knew that, but I thought that was kind of hypocrisy. And so I'm looking for some strippers to help out with a direct action, just letting you know. But again, I want to also say to the city that I'm concerned about kind of what I see going on, the dynamics, the power plays happening in here. I'm hoping that you're able to pay attention to it as well. It saddens me because as women, we already have it hard enough out here. We really need to support each other. And just because some of us aren't dealing with certain issues does not mean that others aren't having a hard time with things. And so women, we need to support and empower each other. When you know something's going on wrong, you need to speak out. I've never been public about this, but I used to be in the sex industry as well. And so I know how these power dynamics happen out. And I just want to say that I don't think there should be, the camera thing, I get both sides, but I'm also like, I'm pretty sure you can read behind the lines. There's probably some things that happen on camera that people don't want to be seen. But I think that this ordinance is not gonna hurt you guys. I'm kind of irritated. This is my last thing I'm gonna say. I hope that you guys do one step further and protect the women who came up here and testified and risk being blacklisted and treated differently now, because that's definitely gonna happen after this. So I hope that you guys now do more of a job and help protect these women and build a relationship and communication line with some of these women who have testified and that will hurt them because of whatever establishment. Because I definitely can see some sort of retaliation happening, and I'm just concerned, and I just ask you ladies to please, stick together, y'all. We got life. Life is hard enough.
Thank you, Ms. O'Brien. Next up and last on our list is Ms. Earl Stone.
Thank you for having me. So I'd first of all like to say I'm representing today from an advocacy standpoint, and I'd like to address and highlight that I do support this ordinance, and I support this especially in regards to health and safety. When we look at the research, the data that's been collected, and we see that we have evidence showing that these individuals need to have a safe and healthy environment to work in. And if we can do anything, it would be to start with supporting this ordinance so that these entertainers have at least a clean establishment, even though they're independent contractors. I feel that as an individual who has a degree in applied psychology and human services, and I'm pursuing a career in the healthcare industry, when I go into a hospital, I know that things are being cleaned. We have an environment where we found spills of bodily fluids, and I feel that it's just and it's right that we support an ordinance so that these establishments are clean. And I don't feel that it's too much to ask to have an employee of these establishments that isn't an independent contractor to clean and to make sure that all the entertainers have an environment where their safety and their health is being supported. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Is there anyone else here who is interested in speaking today? Anyone? Anyone? All right, seeing no further folks interested in speaking, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. I will first make a motion for approval, and then I will open it up for questions and discussion amongst my colleagues. So I would like to move approval of the passage of the ordinance amending Title 13, Chapter 267 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances related to licensing and business regulation, amusements, adding and amending provisions related to places of adult entertainment. With that, I will open up the floor first with Councilmember Gordon, followed by Councilmember Palmisano.
Wonderful. Well, I certainly will support that motion, and I appreciate you making it. I want to note to my colleagues here that there's also a staff direction before you that I'd like to move. I also wanted to address 3 things that were brought up, thank a lot of people, and maybe make just a little speech. I'll try to wrap that all into one package. I just want to say, first of all, that when I ran for office, I never expected that regulating adult entertainment businesses would be a thing I would work on necessarily. It certainly wasn't something I talked about on the campaign stoop very much. And when it came forward, and I was chair of the Public Health Committee at the time, and I felt it was an obligation and a responsibility I had to deal with this when the complaints came in and the reports and the information came in. I was still wondering, well, how is this going to go? Because if you look at the way governments have regulated the industry for a long time, it hadn't gone that well. But luckily, people stepped forward. I think we did this in an incredible way with staff reaching out to academia to come and help do some research so we could really understand what's going on. It was clear to me at that time that the way we dealt with it mostly was by acting like it really didn't exist anywhere. Hardly ever doing inspections, not really doing interactions or anything like that. And as things slowly evolved, I realized, oh, this is absolutely something I talked about on the campaign trail. This is an economic justice issue. This is about social and economic justice. I made promises all over the place I was going to work on this. And so it became suddenly a privilege to roll up my sleeves and kind of dig in and work on it. And I really appreciate, though, that there were so many fantastic partners. Interestingly enough, the lead staff on this, Dan Huff, this is his last day with the city of Minneapolis, correct? So we're sorry to lose you, but on what a great, positive, high note, assuming we get passage and everything, and which I think we will. And so that's fantastic, and it's been a pleasure and honor to work with you and the staff, and I really appreciate the thoughtful way you did this, looking out to get more input, especially from the workers and industry there, and working with you, Rock, and then we had Metro State. And to my friends with SWAP, I really have to say thank you. We wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have gotten this far. We wouldn't understand this at all if it hadn't been for you and all the efforts that you put into this, and Mankato State as well. So really appreciate that. It gave us a picture so we knew what we were working with, and also gave us a chance to actually get feedback and make sure what we were doing didn't run contrary to what the workers wanted. Quite honestly, I had a couple ideas at the beginning that I thought would simplify everything when I heard about this on my own. First thing, close those VIP rooms. Those are ridiculous. Second thing, there shouldn't be independent contractors. They should all be employees. Well, lo and behold, as soon as I reached out to the workers and the entertainers, those were 2 things they absolutely wanted preserved for very good reasons. And so it was important that we had the interaction and we understood that. I also want to just emphasize my gratitude to my colleague and co-author, Lene Palmisano, and also her office. I think Josie and Robin went to more meetings than we did, but I have to say that Lene did a lot of the field work with Robin and went out and saw what was going on and worked on this, and also sat through many of the meetings with me. I also want to acknowledge that industry came to the table, management, and they came and they gave feedback. We had some interactions, some dynamic conversations about some of these issues, and believe it or not, they really didn't understand why tipping would be a problem. I think they didn't realize that there is no other industry where it's allowed or it's done. In fact, there's a state law saying you can't do it, which gets me to the 3 things that I just wanted to hit on in terms of the comments that we had. The issue with tipping, the ordinance says nothing, and just in general, the ordinance isn't putting any requirements on what any of the independent contractors need to do. we're putting all our requirements on what the business license holder has to do. And we're saying to the managers that they can't accept a gratuity. We're also not saying anything about back of the house, so to speak, tipping or tip pooling, anything that the independent contractor wants to do that complies with state law. I think a lot of the lawyers have already left, but they can pool tips just like in a restaurant and all of those things. So as much as we might, I have concerns about the DJ getting the tips and are they going to play the right songs if you don't give them the right tip and all those other details. We can't really mess with that, and we're not. So that's your thing. We also can't, we're not requiring you to sit through any training or hours of training. We're just requiring the license holder to provide you with some information so you know and understand your rights, and so you know and understand how to call the city if there's a problem or somebody else and get protection for that. So I just want you to understand that. Also, the way I read the ordinance, we're not talking about cameras in the VIP spaces. If you read it, we're talking about, we want the areas where the performers are interacting with the customers to be covered by cameras. So if your VIP spaces are all upstairs behind a closed door, separate from everything else, well, you might need to put in a new camera up in that space. But the VIP spaces now are going to have requirements of some kind of opening in the door where a security person can know what's going on. Some height limits so that if you need to stand up and shout for help, somebody can hear you. And if somebody's racing out of there after you're screaming, maybe there'll be a camera on so people later, if they need to look at it when they're investigating a crime. And to be absolutely clear, we actually limited how long that footage can be kept by anybody. And we, I think, are really crystal clear in the ordinance that you really need a legitimate public safety reason before you can look at any of that information. So if somebody's sharing what's on those cameras and you don't think they should be, let us know, because whoever it is, they're probably violating the law once this passes. And I just want to go back to maybe I don't have to, but the tipping issue, it's pretty clear if you actually look at the state law, and it's interesting. The state law talks a lot about how employers can participate and actually can't participate in tipping and can't coerce any tipping going on at all. And then it even goes to such length as to create a new section defining an employee. And then it has a section talking about who's not included as an employee. And there's 19 exceptions. And nowhere is an independent contractor even mentioned. So I say, in terms of that state law talking about tipping, it applies to these workers that are in this business. And so we're just asking the license holders to please comply with state law. So I think that covered it. Hopefully it didn't drag on too long, but thanks so much, everybody, for coming down here. It was really important. And I really agree with everybody who also talked about, sorry, I'm not quite over, everybody who talked about the importance of enforcement. And that's going to be a lot of us working together to figure out how to do that well. And we're probably going to have to even have a check-in after this is unveiled. And before I close, I just want to move the staff direction, if I could do that at the same time.
Sure.
All right. And this staff direction actually is in response to one of the first speakers and the concerns from the industry mostly. If they have to do structural and physical space improvements, can we please give them some time? So I'm directing licensing and consumer services staff to give adult entertainment establishments until September 1, 2022 to implement the physical space requirements in the ordinance pertaining to seating materials and semi-enclosed or private space partition height and entrance widths. And further directing the staff to work with the Health Department, Civil Rights, and City Coordinator's Office staff to convene a work group of entertainers and industry representatives to make recommendations on newly required materials, including, and hopefully you'll stay involved for this, that's not in the staff direction, including training materials, notices detailing legal rights of entertainers, and notices detailing the rules of conduct to be followed by customers, which is all written material we're requiring the licensee to post, and we'd really like some input to make sure we get that right. So that's enough.
All right. So we will fold that staff direction into the motion for the item. All right, Councilmember Palmisano.
Thank you. I just want to say a couple words, and I don't want to belabor anything. In addition to Dan Huff, I want to point out some of our other lead staff, Linda Roberts and Michelle, and others who have really leaned in over the years with Dr. Lauren Martin and her team, her colleagues, including Ms. Christina Melander, who is here today, Dr. Eric Sprankel. You know, long ago in the work group efforts here at City Hall that I took part in, that I was brought into with former Councilmember Elizabeth Glidden, we realized that if we were ever going to make any updates to the regulations of an adult entertainment industry, that we would approach it to include the workforce impacted as a top priority. Thank God we met SWAP. As the co-author of this ordinance reflects field research with the workforce, as you heard during the staff presentation and from so many local leaders of SWAP today who spoke to this so genuinely. Thank you. Industry representatives, this does reflect multiple conversations with industry representatives. It also is about a lot of balance. Different kinds of employment status gets really mixed feedback. We're trying to strike a balance here in some of the difficult pieces and parts of this ordinance, but things I want to make clear, really clear, that this ordinance reflects is, number one, every worker in our city deserves a safe environment. As a couple testifiers says, some of the work in this industry has a lot to do with wage theft. These are legal businesses protected by free speech. They are allowed to operate in our cities, so we must ensure that these places are doing business in a way that keeps the community, including this workforce. Workers shouldn't be put in a position to explain to customers what is and isn't allowed and have these establishments insinuate otherwise. This workforce is marginalized and stigmatized, and it shouldn't be. It's important that we have been approaching this work in a way that undoes that to the extent that we can. So thank you so much for coming out today to City Hall. It's important to stand up and be seen, and I know that that's a vulnerable position to be in. This is a request from workers within our community. These actions that we look to take give the city more enforcement in these establishments. They give us more enforcement with the owners of these establishments. I'm really proud that this seems to have been a very empowering conversation for workers, and I hope that through this process of reinforcing their rights and protections, like when you read some of the testimony given in some of these reports, I didn't know anyone cared about us or our safety, is what somebody said. I hope that you feel more emboldened to assert your rights and feel more comfortable in your space in the future. I really appreciate all of the people that are here today. There's so many more of them in our workforce in Minneapolis. And I want to thank everyone who came out today. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Palmisano. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, well, I'll go ahead and throw myself into queue here. First, I just want to say thank you to all of you who are here. Some folks had to leave, but for being here and speaking to your experience in the face of potential retaliation, really recognizing that that is very, very real within the power dynamics. And I'll speak a little bit more to that about that later. I'm grateful to my colleagues because we actually just passed a wage theft ordinance for workers recently, this past Thursday. And within that same vein, supporting workers' rights is something that I, as a council member, am very committed to, which is why I'm so grateful to have been a co-author on the wage theft ordinance. I know this might be a radical statement from a council member, but sex work is work. And I really see that because I feel that my job as a council member is to not be the moral police, but to be the representative of the people. And additionally, as a transgender person, seeing how frequently my siblings are pushed into the sex work industry, not everybody has the option to opt out. And that's just a reality. And so seeing that within my everyday life, knowing that sex work is work, I just want to name that into this space. I know it might be a little radical coming from a council member, but it's not so radical, I guess. What we're doing here is we're really bringing to light the hidden exploitations and violations of basic human and workers' rights that have been long allowed to go on for too long due to the government acting more as moral police rather than protecting vulnerable workers. And so I'm so grateful to the advocates, to the dancers, to the researchers, city staff, so Dan Huff, Linda Roberts, and the council members Gordon and Palmisano for all of your leadership on this work, because it's our responsibility to protect people, to not say that what you are doing is morally wrong, and so therefore that's not where we're at. Where we're at is that it's our job to protect vulnerable workers. So I'm grateful for the leadership of all of the folks who have been involved. I do have 2 questions, so I'm hoping that maybe Dan or Linda can speak to this. The first is, there's been questions around enforcement, implementation. So can one of you or both of you speak to what enforcement implementation will look like once this ordinance is operationalized? Welcome, Ms. Roberts. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Linda Roberts. I'm Assistant Manager of Business Licensing. And what I would say, just simply with having the tools this ordinance allows us, is to enforce the regulations that are there. So it's simply all we needed to do. So just as we enforce other ordinances on other businesses, like they must pick up litter, they must have cameras and grocery stores, we would fold this enforcement into our work and give us tools actually to regulate these businesses.
So can we maybe break that down a little bit more for public consumption? So if I violate this in this new ordinance, or if I'm a business who lets all my patrons litter every which way, what does it mean to regulate that business?
Chair Cunningham, it's simply that there are mechanisms that the public have and that workers have to make complaints. And so they can do that through 311 or they can call our office. And we have licensed inspectors that are responsible for regulating and ensuring and through an application process and then on annual inspections that businesses are complying with those rules. So in the case of a litter, if we get a complaint from 311 that there's litter existing, then we send out a licensed inspector to verify that worker is, that condition exists.
I just want to kind of do a scan. Did that make sense to folks what that meant?
Do you warn the establishment first?
Do you warn the establishment first
That you're coming?
that you're coming?
No, we, great question, Councilmember. We do not warn the establishments that the condition has been reported to us. We go out on the complaint investigation and we do an unannounced inspection.
Great, thank you. Do you have a question? Okay, I'll have you go and then I'll ask my second question.
Well, really, it was just a little bit of a bigger answer because the violation can go further than a visit. The visit can result in a fine, and the fine can result in an escalated fine, uncorrected problem, and or unpaid fine can result in some conditions. They can be voluntary conditions that the licensee enters into, and ultimately, somebody who's not following our rules can have their license revoked and pulled so they can no longer operate their business. I know that Linda and the staff use a proactive, instructional, educational, compliance-oriented approach, but I just wanted folks to know that there's a hammer back there that we can wield. Oh boy, that sounded way too violent coming from me, but you understand what I'm saying. There are some consequences too that I wanted to make sure were clear enough, and maybe, hopefully I didn't exaggerate.
I just want to thank you for that. I just also want to name that I'm actually her council member, so talk about getting your voice in front of the people. So I also wanted to ask a question about clarification around cameras in the VIP area. Can we please get some clarification on that? Because that was something that I had concerns about when I was briefed on this. What does it actually mean in terms of how this ordinance will be implemented? Will there be cameras in the rooms themselves? If I could hear from you, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, the ordinance requires that cameras be have I guess, an eye on anywhere that there is interaction with customers. So that would include the VIP spaces. What's new here, because if we look at the clubs, almost all the clubs are currently cameraed everywhere already. This ordinance adds, as Councilmember Gordon mentioned, a requirement on how that footage can and cannot be used. So first of all, the footage must be destroyed after 30 days. So it cannot be kept after 30 days. Currently, it can be kept indefinitely by the club. And then it can only be used under particular parameters by the licensed official as deemed when needed for an investigation. Pardon? Okay. I don't know, sorry.
It's okay. So I have some follow-up questions on that. Is this something that will be required to be included in the contract, that they are informed and give consent to being recorded in the VIP areas? And do we have any sort of protections in place in case the video is used inappropriately?
And who's going to view it? Who's going to view the footage?
So the first question, Mr. Chair, I'm not sure if Ms. Roberts has any answer to that. I don't want to weigh into the legal. I would have to defer to our city attorneys on that as to what would or would not be included in a labor agreement. To the second question.
I actually do want to pause there.
Okay.
Do you, Andrea, do you have any additions on that? Because I am curious about whether or not there would be consent prior to cameras being in the VIP area.
Councilmember Cunningham and committee members, I do not believe that the ordinance is drafted has requirements for the specific contracts of the contractors. That's something that's typically worked out between the contractor and the hiring party. But I would defer to Joel Fussy, who drafted this, who might have a better answer to that if Joel's around. Maybe not. I will confer with him and get back to you with a more definite answer to that, but I do not believe that would be included, as it typically would not be included in an employment agreement.
Okay, and then the second question is, are there any, and maybe this is also for the city attorney, but are there any protections in place in case videos are used inappropriately and in a retaliatory way?
Mr. Chair, yes. I'd refer to the attorney specifically as to the language in which that is put forward in the ordinance.
Are you familiar with the language?
Chair Cunningham and council members, there is a retaliation provision in the draft ordinance that says that no establishment shall engage in retaliation of any kind against anyone who's complaining about the violations of the ordinance. So if something is going wrong and someone complains, then retaliation against them would be prohibited.
Okay, thank you. And then, Ms. Roberts, did you have something to add?
Can I just?
Of course.
And I would just like to add, Chair Cunningham, is that in the staff direction that Councilmember Gordon offered, that we've got work to go in going forward and in the training materials that are available. So the retaliation clause is in the ordinance. I don't know the specific answer to the contract, but I really do hope we had a call out to folks that we do need your support and your input on what those training materials are. And so those things could be put into the materials about how the staff is trained, what they know, and what the regulations and policies need to be at each business. And again, the value statement of this ordinance is really that they design this for the workplace protection, safety, and dignity of folks. And so that needs to be paramount as we discuss the policies going forward with your input.
Yes.
Chair Cunningham, if I could add to my earlier answer, Mr. Fussy has weighed in from downstairs, and he agrees that that's not a provision consent to the security cameras. that would be included in a contract, but does point out that we will be preparing materials for education of the various entertainers that will have to be handed out, and the city could include that information within those materials.
Thank you. One moment here.
I actually couldn't quite hear your whispering.
I wanted to ask you a question, not put you on the spot.
I know.
But
So why don't we just
I'll just ask it out loud. So
I'm happy to put something in the staff direction
Yes.
about it. I'm not that, I don't know that we need to change the ordinance at all. We're already requiring a camera safety plan that we can review the safety plan to come from them too. So I wasn't quite sure what you were asking. My contention also is that they already have cameras in the VIP areas. It's like there's booths in the back, and there's a camera in the main room, and we're not saying they're going to add cameras to every VIP space, which I think is the confusion.
No, I don't think that that's correct, if I may. I heard that there would have to be cameras. So would there be cameras in the individual VIP room?
They're positioned in a manner that they shall cover all of the facilities which all areas of the facility in which entertainers may interact with or perform for customers.
Yes.
And so that
Hang on.
Chair Cunningham and Councilmember Gordon, that would include the VIP section areas.
Within the rooms?
Yep, if entertainment is being provided in those rooms.
So,
but just to clarify, the walls to those rooms can only go up 5 feet, and there must be an opening, and there also must be an opening in the door. So whether it's a room or a booth, so my intent was not to, I don't think we're going to have cameras behind the bar, seeing what's going on underneath it. I don't think we're going to have cameras under all the tables to see what people's feet are doing. We're going to have cameras in the area where the rooms are, so that's my intention as an author of the ordinance. So learning that we're going to add 100 cameras if there's 100 VIP booths, because I don't consider them rooms necessarily, is new. So we might have to look at the interpretation. Are there already one for every VIP space in most of the clubs?
Ms. Roberts?
Chair Cunningham through Councilmember Gordon, what I understand is from our experience from doing inspections that there are cameras throughout the establishments and even in other areas. So I don't think that any of the establishments, and even when they looked at the code and the intention of the code, anticipated that they'd be adding any new cameras. Because we've had many conversations with the industry, and I think that they're satisfied that they wouldn't be adding any more cameras.
Well, that's what I thought too.
Yep.
That they're covering all the areas now, and they're going to have to keep covering the areas now, and they're not going to add cameras for every small nook and cranny. But
that's correct.
I guess,
well, if there is customer dancer interaction in that nook and cranny, then it would have to be covered by a camera.
The area would be.
So I guess I think that where my challenge is right now is that we're having multiple interpretations of the same thing. And that is a concern for me, because then how are we going to implement it consistently is a concern that I have. Councilmember Palmisano, do you want to add?
So in our conversations with industry, those that have chosen to participate in industry conversations, we have found, and in my visits with regulatory service staff to establishments in Minneapolis, we have found that security cameras cover by and large all of the space, even in very, very low light conditions. But what we were trying to do here with SWAP's interest as well is to put controls on that footage, because today many establishments don't have controls on that footage. They don't have controls over who can see it and who can't, when things can be looked up, when things can be removed from it. And this is about keeping a tight realm of control over how those security cameras, the footage from that exists today, making sure that there is enough time if a worker wants to come forward with a complaint of something that happened in that establishment, but not too long, so that these tapes are not kept indefinitely, so that they do roll off with regularity, and that there is a tight order of control over how they can be requested. Typically, in our scenarios, they were from a worker wanting to make an allegation, and how their safety and how that footage is protected. So my understanding and in my conversations with the industry, just to be completely clear and consistent here, is that as we get to how we interpret these rules, that we will need to make sure that that persists. We need to have some kind of hard language in here, like a hard black and white line, how we interpret these in terms of coverage of security. We have security cameras all over City Hall, but again, it doesn't take every corner and underneath every table into any sort of consideration. And I think that it's reasonable. I think that it's reasonable that this would follow that same line of reasoning as we develop rules from this policy.
So I will ask folks to please limit their commentary in the audience. I really would appreciate that. We can have further conversations offline to be able to have more discussions. And thank you, Councilmember Palmisano, for that clarification. I definitely think, first I just want to name, like, this is really great work. So I don't want to make it sound like I'm criticizing. I just want to make sure that I have an understanding and folks have an understanding of the camera aspect, because that was consistently raised as a concern. And I think it's great to have those regulations on how long the camera, like the footage is available and who has access to it, since that's not covered now. So thank you for that clarification. Councilmember Gordon.
So how about we pass this forward to the council, and then I make a commitment to work with you, work with Mr. Fussy, and reach back to SWAP, and we can figure out how to define area so it makes sense, and look at what's already existing. And I'm sure Councilmember Palmisano would join me in saying we're open to better defining that sentence and making sure we understand what's really happening. And then we can see if we can do something before the council meeting, which would happen a week from Friday.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that. I do appreciate it, being willing to dig deeper into it just so we can have a clear understanding for everybody involved. So we currently have a motion on the floor for approval of this item, with additionally the staff direction brought forward by Councilmember Gordon. I will ask one last time if there's any other questions or comments. All right, seeing none. I want to just say thank you for being willing to collaborate on this component of it.
3 or 4 more words or whatever.
Yes, just for a little bit tighter language to be able to have an understanding, so we're all interpreting it the same way. So with that, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Thank you again, everyone, for being here today. With no further business before the committee, we are adjourned.